Okay, so welcome to those who are joining me live and those who are watching this video on YouTube after it's been filmed and uploaded. So basically, this is the video that I told you about where I'm going to write an essay. I said a 1,000 word essay. It might be a 1,200 one because the topic I've picked, typically in philosophy courses, we write 1,200 word essays in first year. Sometimes they're 1,000 word essays, but usually 1,200 word essays. That doesn't really make a difference. The fact that I might do a 1,200 word one rather than a 1,000 word one. Um, Everything I'm doing is the same. The only difference is that with your topic, it's just 1,000 words instead. Now, this video is going to be easier to understand if you've watched the other one on the essay writing process, okay? So I'm not going to talk through too much why I'm doing what I'm doing. I just say, now I take my essay template and I do this. And if you've watched my part 3 video on the essay writing process, it'll make sense why I'm doing that. But some of it might be self-explanatory as you watch along. Yeah, if you've watched that previous video, this video will make more sense. I think this one would be beneficial even if you haven't watched the other one. So I think where we're going to get to is that I'll get a first draft out and then I'll just be polishing it in maybe a second video. And I think maybe it's going to be like 2 1-hour videos, maybe a little bit over that. I doubt it. Before, however, I actually write this essay, you need to understand the topic. And I'm going to basically give like an essay question. And basically, the essay question is, something like this. So I'm going to make the essay question for myself. All right. So I'm going to start sharing one of my screen. Okay, so I'm just gonna wait for a thumbs up to see that you can see what I see. Great, awesome. And what I see is like basically a file that says essay. I'm gonna click on it, and what I've got in here is research and writing, right? So this is where this folder up here is where I put like all of my sources and stuff, and all of the notes I've been taking. So this video assumes you've already done your research and you've taken notes from the research, right? I'm going to have like example documents. Well, not really examples. I've actually read the sources and taken notes. So they're going to be in there. And you see I've got 3 sources, okay? And note that I would have like a 4th Word document in here, which is just like my master source list. It tells me what all my sources are, just in case any files get corrupted. I know what sources I was reading and, like in which page intervals of those sources I was doing research. Maybe they are books. Maybe I have them in hard copy. Maybe I have them in electronic copy. Maybe they are journal articles. For most of you, it's just going to be the lecture notes, okay? So this part is very simple for you. And then in here, I've got writing, and you can see that I haven't done anything. So we're doing this whole thing from scratch, okay? And the reason I wanted to do it from scratch is because getting started is the hardest part, okay? Just think about drawing like a picture, like you're doing a sketch. Suppose you're going to sketch someone's face and you don't have any experience in drawing, and you don't have any, like no one has taught you how to draw before and you don't know what you are doing. Well, it might be difficult to know where to start. Do I just, draw a circle for the head first, or do I just pick a random line in the image if I'm looking at a person and trying to draw a portrait, do I just pick one of the lines of their silhouette and start there. You know, it's difficult to know where to start, but maybe you get a drawing instructor, and I don't know any of this. I'm just sort of like making it up. Who teaches you that there's certain geometric relations between facial features and the body, and that first you should start with a bit of geometry. So maybe you draw like some lines that capture the geometric relations between shoulders and hips, you know, the space from the hips to the knees to the feet, uh, where the elbows tend to be when the arms are hanging down the side, and you know, with the silhouette of a face where the eyes are. So you might draw like a line here to know that that's going to be the eye line, and then a line down the middle, so you have something to uh, measure symmetry off of, to gauge your symmetry off of. And maybe they tell you to start with the eyes. And when you start with the eyes, then you know in between the eyes are the nose. So once you've started, you know, then you know that you can draw the nose next. And then you just get below the nose and you know you can sketch in the lips and you've done the face. And then you know that to just come out from the eyes a little bit in both directions, there's where the ears would be. And now this thing is starting to look like a head, but it's bald. It needs some hair. So you sketch in some hair and you follow the silhouette around. And before you know, you have like a portrait of someone. Okay. So that's why I'm starting completely anew, because getting started is the hardest place to start. Okay. So what I'm going to do is first write the essay, um, the essay question. So I'm going to open a Word doc and I'm going to see whether I'll have to stop share and I'll share my screen. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is like write an essay question. Okay, and the essay question is going to be something like, you know, imagine here I've got a bunch of stuff in the task sheet that gives context. So like I'm just like making up a task sheet. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's not the essay itself. So like, you know, insert context and, you know, definition of some problem or something like that. Insert context sentences here, right? So in your task, that's like, you know, the quotes where they talk about Einstein, or the quotes at least attributed to Einstein and the authors against Einstein. And then it says, you know, some of these quotes are characteristic of falsification or falsificationism. And then you get your 2 essay questions. Okay, so that's what the context sentences would be, something like that. Now, let's say we've got a bunch of essay questions, and you know, let's say mine is essay 1. All right, and our topic is to do with, you know, global warming or climate change. Climate change, global warming, and basically, you've heard of carbon emission taxes, right? So I've deliberately picked something outside of philosophy of science, a topic that I think everyone will have heard of. And you've heard of things like a mining tax and an emissions tax. You've heard of, you know, the various agreements that countries might reach when they go to a summit and try to set like emissions targets to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions of fossil fuel consumption and that kind of thing. They set these targets, right? Okay, well, without going into this too much, I'm just trying to give context for like the topic. Uh, let's imagine first that, you know, it's a meeting about nuclear weapons disarmament. So there's a bunch of nuclear powers that are meeting at a summit, and collectively they have the goal of reducing nuclear weapons proliferation globally. and hopefully reaching a time when countries don't have nuclear weapons anymore. There are no nuclear weapons. Now, they're not just all going to rock up to the meeting and agree that by such and such a date we're all going to get rid of our nuclear weapons. They're going to set these incremental targets. So maybe like within 5 years, we have reduced our stockpiles by 20% or whatever, and then within another few years we'll be down to 50, and they'll set all of these incremental targets until such time when they think that they can all get together again and they'll all have very few nuclear warheads left, and they can get rid of the rest and uh, proclaim to the world that through their cooperation, they've managed to give us a world free of nuclear weapons. Okay. Notice that, let's say they set the first target, they might all go away and think, okay, well, how do I know that the other countries are going to stick to their promises? Okay, because here's what can happen. Let's suppose everyone else disarms their nuclear weapons. Well, then if I keep mine, right, then look at the benefit I have. I'm the most powerful country in the world, at least militarily speaking, because no one has nuclear weapons except me. What if, so in that case, if that's the scenario that happens, I shouldn't give up my nuclear weapons. Because if they give theirs up, then I have this great opportunity to become a superpower. So, or at least the one superpower in the world, or something like that. You get what I mean. So, but what if they didn't keep their promise and they kept their nuclear weapons? Well, then should I give mine up or should I keep mine? Well, if they keep theirs and I give my nukes up, then I'm a sucker. Okay, all of the other superpowers still have their warheads and I don't have any. So all that happened is the power balances throughout the world remained the same, except when it comes to me, I just got weaker. Okay, so in both scenarios, you might just want to keep yours after you go away from the meeting. This is what's called a prisoner's dilemma. I haven't explained it precisely at all. I'm just trying to give you the flavor of the idea. It's a prisoner's dilemma. It'd be easier to understand if I drew a table, and showed the options. But that will come later anyways. Okay, well, I'm just going to pause here to see if everyone understands what I've said first, or if there's any confusion. Basically, I'll just recap it. Is that you've all agreed that within like 3 years you're going to reduce your stockpile, and when you go away, you think, well, I've got two options: reduce or don't reduce. And what should I do? Well, everyone else has two options: reduce or don't reduce. Suppose case one, they all reduce. Well, if I reduce, then none of us have nukes. That's the situation which we all want, but I can get a better situation than that where I have nukes and no one else has nukes. So I could be the strongest. Okay. Let's say case two, they don't reduce. They go back on their word. Well, should I reduce my stockpile or should I keep my stockpile? Well, if they keep their stockpile, then I'm vulnerable if I give mine up. So I should keep mine. So whatever they decide to do, the other countries, it seems like the better option, the more goal rational option, assuming I'm a goal rational individual and I put my own interests first. That's all we're supposing in this scenario, that like these countries put their own national interests first. That and that's not a terribly unrealistic assumption. That in either case, the thing to do is keep your stockpile. Regardless, notice there's no probability there or anything like that. Okay, it's just regardless of what the other countries do, it seems like I should keep mine. But then realize that all of the other countries are in the exact same position as me and taking into account precisely the same considerations. So what conclusion will they come to? They'll come to the exact same conclusion as I have, and then no countries will reduce. And this has actually been the history of attempts to achieve nuclear weapons disarmament. Okay. Um, yeah, and one explanation for why that has been the case is what I've described, the kind of reasoning I've described, and that's an example of a prisoner's dilemma. Okay, if anyone wants to know more about prisoner's dilemma and other real life examples of prisoner's dilemmas, just hit me up. So the topic or the discipline we are writing in now is not philosophy of science, it's political philosophy. Okay, so uh, yeah, now I'll pause and you can give the thumbs up to say you've understood everything that I've said, or thumbs down that something's confusing. All right, thank you. And I'll just wait for the other. Yep, thank you very much. Okay, so that's what a prisoner's dilemma is. I explained it with nuclear weapons first because it's easier to understand, but it turns out that this is this is why many economists and political philosophers think that reducing our carbon footprint globally and both as individual countries is so difficult to achieve. Um, there are other reasons, but basically, notice in the scenario with the nukes, if I was to dispose of my nuclear weapons, like I'm out of pocket. I spent a lot of money doing research and development to build them. I had to pay for all the material. It took it took a huge portion out of my defense budget to build these. And when I get rid of them, not only am I out of pocket, but it's actually costing me money to dispose of them safely. I have to pull them apart. It means I have to pay people to do it. Then I have to comply with these international regulations to make sure it's done safely and responsibly. And that all costs money. Then I need some kind of mechanism for getting rid of the nuclear waste or somehow storing it. I can't just dump it. Yeah, it's always more expensive to do things it's almost always more expensive to do things responsibly than it is to do things. Uh, it's almost always more expensive to do things responsibly than it is to do things irresponsibly over the short term. Whereas over the long term, obviously, it's way more costly if you just dispose of the nuclear waste however you want. Issues can come back, costly issues can come back to bite you in the buttocks at some later time. And just trying to gather my train of thought. And governments kind of plan for the short to medium term because, in democracies, they tend to plan off election cycles. So, if they're out of government or retired from politics, they might not be so concerned about it, and it might be a challenge for, some next generation or something like that. So now let's understand how this relates to, like climate change. So we're having meetings with countries and we're trying to agree on targets that quantify our reduction in greenhouse gas emissions because we want to reduce the negative effects of climate change. Now, pretty much the same thing happens. Okay, like to reduce your carbon footprint puts a negative economic impact on many industries because most developed countries have an economy that is tied to fossil fuels and various other industries that release carbon emissions. Okay, so if you are to curb your carbon emissions, there's going to be some kind of economic impact. And it's very difficult to come up with a way as to how we can do this without suffering economic costs. Of course, we, if ensuring that the planet does not become uninhabitable for us is much more important. So you might think that it's straightforwardly the case that obviously we should just all do it. But the thing is, this prisoner's dilemma thing comes in. So let's say we all go have our meeting and we agree that we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by, I'm just like plucking numbers out of my head, like 20% within however many years. Okay, then we go away and we're like, well, it's going to be economically costly to do this. And because it's a whole bunch of countries that are contributing to the emissions, well, I'm just like a very small contributor. I'm not going to make the difference between the planet becoming uninhabitable for humankind or not. Okay, so like I'm not the threshold breaker. So if enough other countries reduce their emissions, then I can just keep releasing mine. Okay, so let's say, well, suppose I've got two options. I can reduce mine, or I can keep them as they are, maybe increase them. Who knows? Like, I can reduce or not reduce. Let's put it that way. Suppose I reduce. Okay, well, then I foot the bill. I pay some of the economic burden, right? And suppose they, sorry, suppose they reduce, right? Well, then they're paying for the cost. So I might as well get the benefits for free, the benefits of clean air, a habitable planet, stuff like that. So case one is suppose they reduce. Well, if I reduce, well, I'm not a difference maker. Imagining I'm a world leader. If I reduce, I'm not a difference maker. Whether I reduce or not isn't going to be the make or break. So I might as well not pay for something that I'm getting for free and let my economy continue to do well whilst everyone else is reducing and suffering the economic impact, right? And case two, let's suppose they don't reduce. Well, then not enough countries are reducing to make a difference anyways. It's pretty doom and gloom, but why should I? I'd just be paying the economic burden when it's not going to make a difference in the end anyways, because too many other countries aren't reducing. Okay, so do you see how the prisoner's dilemma applies to the carbon emissions footprint issue? Yep, I just wait for the other. Awesome. Okay, so I'm just gonna like make this essay question up. I didn't come up with it precisely in my head, but like here goes. It's you know, let's say uh, this is a really uh, informal one. If I wanted to sit around for a long time or like and come up with one that was better and more precise, like the ones in your essay topic, I would. But like I just want to get to the essay, so I'm going to give a statement. Okay. Greenhouse gas emissions contribute to climate change. If the world does not take measures to reduce the world's carbon footprint, the evidence indicates that the Earth will become uninhabitable by the year, hashity hash, starity star. Okay. So basically, where I'm going with this is, given that we're going to mess our planet up too much for us to live on it, it might seem the case that world leaders would just think it's straightforwardly and rationally the case that we just all need to start reducing our carbon footprint, right? But why, many countries seem reluctant to do it. So, I'm trying to come to, I'm trying to explain why this is the case. That's what I'm trying to do in my essay, and I'm trying to like propose a solution. Okay, so world leaders might be inclined to cooperate and reduce greenhouse gas. Some of this text I can't see, so because it goes into the Zoom console. Reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to protect the environment. The environment. If so, so is everyone familiar with like like economic sanctions? So when a bunch of countries want to stop some country from doing something that the other countries don't like, rather than use military strength, they might impose economic sanctions. So they might all say, okay, we're going to tax your imports to our country even higher. We aren't going to trade with you the some materials that your economy depends on. If your economy is tied in significant, a significant percentage of it is tied to coffee. We're not going to buy a coffee, or we're not, something along those lines. So you're all familiar with economic sanctions, how they try to coerce other countries to do right by the majority. Yep. Just waiting on the other, and I'll check chat. Yep. So basically, you can kind of think of it as like your parents. If they don't like the way you've been behaving lately, like when you're a young teenager or something, they start to reduce your pocket money. They'll say like, okay, well, I'll give you less pocket money a week, or when you do your chores, we'll give you less pocket money per hour or something like that. It's that kind of thing, but countries doing it to each other. So a bunch of countries will gang up, and what they try and do is they will mess with another country's economy until that country starts playing by the rules, or refraining from the behavior that's bugging everyone else. So maybe you remember a few years ago, Russia invaded the Ukraine and annexed Crimea, and a lot of countries didn't like this. Some countries supported it, a lot of countries didn't. And in response, the countries that didn't support the annexation of Crimea from the Ukraine by Russia imposed economic sanctions on Russia. It's basically trying to harm the economy of that country. And they're controversial because they tend to harm the people, and the world leaders, the leaders of those countries are doing fine. So it ends up affecting the people of a country who didn't make the decision that motivated the sanction in the first place. But countries are still willing to do it despite that, because it can make that world leader popular. This is the common view. It can make that world leader less popular in the country. So the the people of the country can start to dislike the world leader because they might see the world leader, their country's prime minister or president or whatever, or dictator, as responsible for the rest of the world putting sanctions on them. But actually, historically, they sometimes have an opposite effect. It can harden their resolve and the resolve of the people, and the people start to see the foreign countries imposing the sanctions as the ones responsible. So yeah, they're hit and miss. But yeah, does that clear it up? Does that clear up what sanctions are? Excellent, cool. Okay, so if so, some may argue that economic sanctions are unnecessary. Thank gosh for spell checker. Unnecessary, since world leaders would be motivated to voluntarily reduce carbon emissions. If I say, hey, this is going to be really, really bad for you, you might just voluntarily stop doing it. That's what these people are saying. If it's really, really bad for the world and for you if you just keep emitting. So, you'd think that they would voluntarily stop doing it. But, we're not making very speedy progress in that regard. And then I'm just going to put discuss. So I'm going to leave it pretty open. Okay. Or I might actually make it more, okay, more precise. Okay. Why? Okay. So why might world leaders be hesitant to reduce carbon emissions despite the danger to the planet? Why might world leaders be hesitant to reduce carbon emissions despite the danger to the planet? And then propose at least one solution. Okay, so that's the essay question that I've chosen, right? Everyone happy with that? Okay, so I read some, not whole books, but I was just like reading parts of books and journal articles. And I collected some, I took some notes. All right, and what I got was end up with 3 sources, and I'm going to find the folder with those 3 sources in them. So that's back here. Where I had the research and the writing folder. So can you tell me what I'm going to do is click on research and open that folder. I want to tell you whether it stays on this screen or whether you can see the new folder. Thumbs up for new folder. Great. Okay, and now just imagine that there's a 4th one there that had all of my sources in it. That's like my master source document that you would have seen me explain in the part 3 video, the essay writing process. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to go into the writing folder and just thumbs up that was all good. That way I know that I can just keep doing this. So there should be nothing in this folder. Great. All right. And I'm going to start saving Word documents there. All right. So that's my task sheet. I'm just going to save the task sheet. You won't be able to see this, but I'm going to save it. Thanks for your patience. Cool. So I've just saved it in there. Probably should have done that before the video so I could just like read it out to you. So yeah, that's good to know for next time. Well, I knew that. The more you prepare, the better you do. But go back to sharing that doc. It's hard to get stuff to minimize. You know, the Zoom console's all in the way. It's hard to like alt tab between stuff. Okay, so here I am. And look, you don't have to break the folders up like this. So you should be able to see now. If you can't, then I need to play with stuff. But yeah, you don't have to break things up like this. This is just one way that I keep it organized. So what I did is, you know, I would have my task sheet in the research folder. Okay. Now I'm going to open up these Word docs, and there's not heaps of research there, but you know, I only did a little bit of research to write something for this video. If it was a real essay, I would have more research and I'd have to sift through more evidence and stuff like that. But you know, I've already got a decent idea of what I'm going to argue in my head. So I knew that I didn't have to go and find other stuff. And like I'm speaking outside of the scenario now. So, you know, like this in this video, I'm pretending that I'm writing the essay and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. So that's in the scenario. Right now, I'm speaking out of the scenario. I have like more or less a decent idea of what I'm going to do and what other sources had to say on the issue. Like, so I didn't do the extra research because it's stuff that I'm familiar with, like it's literature that I'm familiar with. So uh, not everything, but yeah, I just didn't research beyond what I knew I needed. But typically, you will research beyond what you need, or you'll research far beyond what you need. It's like you'll include like a small percentage of how much research you did in the eventual thing. This won't be an issue for you because most of you are just using the lecture notes and maybe like a small handful of other sources, like one or two, if you did extra, which you don't need to. Okay, so I'm going to share this Word doc, and the Word doc is my first source of notes. So, okay, here we have source one. And you see what I've done is I've got source one, and then it was like a paper that I read. And I put the pages that I read from. So I just like read these 2 pages. And if you're wondering why those pages are so big and it's a journal article, it's not a 1,000, you know, it's not like a several thousand page journal article. It's a journal with a bunch of articles in them. And by the time this article appears in that journal, yeah, there's been a bunch of other journals before it, a bunch of other articles before it in the journal. So yeah, it's not like one article with so many pages in it. It's like a 30-page thing. Yeah, and the author was Hardin, who's a political philosopher. And I just put in some titles. with the topics, because just like when you write an essay, each paragraph sticks to one topic. Um, well, that's how other authors write too. You know, in each paragraph, they discuss one topic. So if you take a bunch of notes from a paragraph, it's handy for clarifying your thinking to sit back and say, well, what's the topic of this paragraph? There won't be a title written in there usually, but you can come up with it because you know you can read the paragraph and see what it's trying to convince you. So the topic of this paragraph was pollution, but sometimes you'll find something in another paragraph that will be related to pollution as well. So it might go in here. Okay, so this isn't a hard and fast thing. It's just a bit of a guideline thing. Okay, and then there was mutual coercion, mutually agreed upon coercion. It's going to become clear. So that's kind of like what sanctions are. You know, let's say Billy, Mary, and Angela, we all agree that we're going to be coffee drinkers for the rest of our studies, and we are never going to switch to tea, right? And we all like make this pact that if one of us, when we all go to like Merlot's cafe, let's say like every time we go, it's someone's turn to pay. So when we go, it's my turn to pay for all of our coffees. All right. And then the next time we go, it's Mary's turn. The next time we go, it's Angela's turn. We will make this agreement that if someone ends up wanting tea over coffee, we won't pay for theirs every time we go. So let's say Mary decides that she likes tea over coffee, and then we go to Merlot's, and it's my turn to pay. Well, I'm going to pay for my coffee. I'm going to pay for Angela's coffee, but Mary's going to have to pay for her own. I forget who was the tea drinker. I forget who like went back on the agreement. Let's say it was Mary. Like Mary's going to have to pay for her own tea. So every time we go, Mary has to pay for herself, and this like is economically damaging. It costs her more money than it otherwise would. In reality, it evens itself out because no, it doesn't, because when we go and it's Mary's turn to pay, she still has to pay for all three of us. She'll get her tea, and Angela and I will get our coffees, and it's still her turn to shout. Yeah, so it is like an economic sanction. But because there was a time before Mary went over to the tea side, and she was on like team coffee, she agreed to this. So that's like mutually agreed upon coercion. All right. So thumbs up if everyone gets that. Good. Excellent. And yeah, by the way, that arrangement is in effect starting now. Okay. Anyways, I'm just kidding. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and you can see, like, usually I might have like 4 or 5 pages worth of stuff here. Okay. So if I didn't really know what I was going to argue, I'd have like 4 or 5 pages worth of stuff. So just imagine there's way more stuff in here. Okay. Now I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open up the next source. There won't be anything really to say on it. Just so that you can see others. Um, so here is source 2. All right. Okay, so this was by a political philosopher. I think Gooden was a political philosopher, or is, but I have a sneaking suspicion that is also something else. I think he might have been an economist turned political philosopher, or yeah, my memory's hazy, but I think actually I suspect he might have been a scientist and not a philosopher. Doesn't matter for our purposes. But he wrote something called "Think Globally and Act Locally." Uh, I'm happy to send any of you these papers to read if you are interested in them. But basically, everything was very similar topic, and so I didn't really give this a like a title, but I could if I wanted to, and it would be like economic games. So when I described to you when I very imprecisely described what a prisoner's dilemma was, there's other kind of dilemmas and kind of scenarios like that that economists like to study, and they refer to them as games. Okay, so like a prisoner's dilemma is you can think of as a game, and like you're playing to win, and yeah, the subdiscipline of economics that studies these games is called game theory. But it's a bit of a multidisciplinary uh, discipline between economics and mathematics. Mathematicians work on game theory, economists work on game theory as well. And political philosophers work on game theory too, especially when it comes to like the ethical side. When we say like, oh, this game describes this real, it kind of models this real economic scenario that's very common, and it seems to lead to these results that are unethical and cause harm. So like we need some ethical thinking. Typically, political philosophers come in then. So that's kind of what we're doing now. We've realized that trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions uh, is a prisoner's dilemma, just like nuclear weapons disarmament is a prisoner's dilemma. A very very similar scenario to a prisoner's dilemma is called the tragedy of the commons. Um, it's very similar. So that one's a bit of a game between public property and private property, and the pros and cons of making something private property and making something public property, and the ethical challenges that arise with that. So, anyways, yeah, I gave this title "Economic Games." If any of you are interested in more of this kind of stuff, like send me an email. So we've only got 10 minutes before I have to wrap it up, 10-20 minutes, something like that. But we're actually going to have a draft before I wrap it up. We're going to have a first draft. So I'm just going to pause for a second whilst I'm getting up the third source. But I bet you didn't think it was all that easy. And it isn't as easy as I'm showing it to be, because I have more experience writing essays and I have a good idea of what I want to argue. But yeah, I bet you didn't think it would be like that. That we are going to have a draft like pretty soon. So I'm just going to open up the third source. And the reason I'm explaining like the research I've done is so that you understand the essay when I write it. Like it's got some context. So can you give a thumbs up if you can still see source 2, or whether you can see source 3 now? Okay, yeah, thumbs up is for source 2. Cool, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to stop share and I'm going to share source 3. Okay, so here's source 3, and this talks about public harms and common goods. And this is by a political philosopher named Gauss. And Gauss is actually an Australian. I think he's at one of those Ivy League universities in the United States. I don't know where he is. I think he was at the Australian National University, the ANU, for a good time. I don't know him personally. I've never met him, but I've read a lot of his work and a few of his books. And we have a mutual friend, someone a friend of mine knows Gauss very well. But yeah, I don't. But yeah, I love his work. Uh, Anyways, so this talks about public harms and common goods, and basically the kind of research I was doing here refers to like threshold effects. So let's just imagine the air in a city. And let's imagine that I'm an asthmatic, right? So I have asthma. And, you know, if people all drive their cars and they don't catch public transport, and the factories in my city are always pretty active and releasing carbon emissions, the air is going to not be, the air is not going to be very clean. And, there's going to be smog in the atmosphere. And that might cause dramas for my respiratory system. Okay. uh, Now this isn't something that just happens naturally. Okay, like if there weren't any people out there doing things, the air would be clean and I'd be able to breathe pretty comfortably. So people are doing it, which means people are responsible. uh, So who's responsible for my difficulty breathing? Well, notice that the responsibility is very thinly diluted between, several thousand or several million people, depending on the population of the city. I live in an apartment building in the city, and when I breathe the air, it affects, it triggers my asthma, for example. So let's imagine that. Okay, it's difficult for me to to single out individuals and hold them responsible, because the responsibility that each individual shares is very small. Okay, because the total responsibility for the dirty air is so diluted between everyone who's contributing to pollution. So let's say the air can sort of let's say some air which takes which like a city that has 1,000 people polluting and driving cars and things like that, and having chimney fires and that. If about 1,000 people are doing it in the city, the air is fine and I can breathe. And let's suppose that once it hits 1,005, that starts to trigger my asthma. Now, those 5 people you can't say are responsible for triggering it. Those extra 5, once the extra 5 on top of the 1,000 start doing it, you can't say that they're any more responsible than anyone else, because they're not doing anything different than anyone else. In fact, we couldn't tell which of the 5. Okay. So this is like a threshold effect. Okay, if about 1,000 people are doing it, I'm fine. But there's a threshold. I don't actually have asthma, by the way, but if 1,005 people start doing it, this triggers my asthma. That's a threshold effect. Okay, so is everyone happy with what I've explained so far? Because in like 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to punch out a draft, and I'm going to use in my argument basically all of the concepts we've just discussed. So, like a prisoner's dilemma, public harms and common goods, maybe a tragedy of the commons. It's not so precise in my head yet. I'm still, I'm speaking in the scenario now, not outside of the scenario. Like I'm still a bit confused, but I'm going to talk about economic sanctions, I think, and yeah, things like that. Okay, so that's source 1, 2, and 3. Okay, what I would do now is I'm going to do this quickly, and then we'll go for like a 5 or 10 minute break. Then I'll come back, I'll punch out the draft. That'll take like 10 minutes or something. And understand now that the draft is going to be so bad that some of you who are watching or ones that are watching later on YouTube might be sitting in your chair laughing. Yeah. It's fine to get out it's fine for your first draft to be garbage and to sound silly. Like basically the way I'm speaking right now could never appear in an essay. That could never be the language of an essay. But my first draft, I basically write slightly better than I speak, unscriptedly. Okay. And then I just polish that and polish that and polish that through draft after draft after draft until it appears in an essay. That's why I'm going to be able to knock the draft out in like 5 or 10 minutes because I don't have trouble speaking, right? I don't have trouble speaking. I can speak 1,000 words in 5 or 10 minutes. All I got to do is capture them as I speak. All right. So, because we like covered some concepts that might be somewhat unfamiliar to people, I'm going to actually go for the break now. But just a thumbs up to say that nothing I've said has been confusing or anything like that, and that you're ready to go for a 5 or 10 minute break. Okay, cool. As always, if you have any questions, post them in the chat. If you're worried about stopping me, I'm not going to stop for questions that aren't related to the topic of this video. But that being said, don't hesitate to put them in the chat because I'll just read the chat afterwards after I stop recording the video and I'll get back to you. Okay, so it is 1828 and we will come back at 9 past. Okay, if you're following along on YouTube, uh, I forgot to unmute myself, and I was just saying that I'm just going to wait in the break until I get a thumbs up from the people in the meeting. Um, who does prefer tea over coffee, by the way? I like water. Angela says, I like water. Mary says, I like both. Oh, you're being the taco girl, soft shell, hard shell tacos. Why can't we have both? Okay, so I didn't ask whether you like tea and like coffee. I asked whether you had a preference, or does it vary from day to day? Coffee when I'm stressed. So Mary says, and Angela says, I'm not a big fan of either, but I drink coffee because I need caffeine. Yeah. Yeah. So the terrible thing with me is that I actually like coffee. So it's not just for the caffeine. I like coffee. So that's terrible. Anyways, so I'm going to continue. So I'm going to create a new Word doc, and then I'm going to start sharing it. Just see where I'm at. Mary says it is very evident, huh? Yeah, I always have a coffee. I don't think there's been a single moment in any of these Zoom meetings where I haven't had a coffee in arm's reach. Okay, so I'm going to share that doc. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make an essay template, and I'm not going to explain how this thing works or anything like that, and why the structure is the way it is and why I'm filling in this part before that part or anything like that. That's all in part 2. So yeah, if you want to understand this better, you'll have to watch part 3, the last video I made. Basically in the playlist, it's the video before this. I think it's the 3rd video I made. Okay, so I'm just going to give this a title, essay template. All right, and then I'm going to save it. You might not be able to see this, I'm not sure. But it's going to go into the writing folder. Okay, so I've saved the document as an essay template, and I'm going to just build the template according to the structure of an essay. Now, the order in which I'm building it's not the order in which I'm writing it. And I'm going to give myself 1,200 words for this topic with a plus or minus 10% margin. For your task, you have 1,000 words with a plus or minus 10% margin either side. So that margin means you won't be penalized so long as you are within it. Okay, so 1,200, 10% of 1,200 is 120. So I can be 120 words under 1,200 or 120 words over. I have to stay within that. So essay template. So introduction, thesis statement. All right, now I'm going to go body, paragraph 1. And, if I think about how many words this is all going to be, let's say template. I'm going to write the word count in. Okay. Well, let's say roughly, a good rule of thumb is 10% of the word count goes towards the introduction and 10% goes towards the conclusion. So my introduction is going to have to be roughly 120 words. That's what I'm able to spend introducing the topic and delivering my thesis statement. I'm just going to leave that body paragraph bit for a second. Like I'll leave the word count, but I'll have topic sentence, evidence, right? And then I'll put like a 1, 2 there. Okay. And I'll just like fill that in with like a letter. Maybe like just to build a template. And now I'll have my linking sentence. And once I've got that, I'm just going to leave it and write conclusion and restate thesis statement. Okay, so colons are things I'm getting, like things that have a colon after them are things I'm going to have to fill in this template. And things that don't are just like titles. Now I know that the conclusion is going to have roughly 120 words. And, a paragraph is like roughly 300 words, but that's just a guideline to help you stay within word count. Like I kind of go off 255 or something like that. Yeah, something between 250 and 300. But really a paragraph is as long as it needs to be to achieve its intended purpose, to basically argue whatever you intended to argue about the topic that paragraph is dedicated to. So yeah, really just guidelines, especially for the body paragraph word count. And if you're, writing 1,200 word essay, well, if you were to divide that by, let's say 300, you're going to get 4 paragraphs, but that doesn't really cut it. What we really need to do is understand first that 10% is dedicated to the introduction and 10% is dedicated to the conclusion. So what we really need to do is take like 1,200 and subtract 20% of the word count. So that's going to be like 240 words, right? So when we subtract 240 words, we're going to get 960 words to play with, right? And now we're going to divide 960 by 300. And we see that we get like 3.2 paragraphs. So, if some of your paragraphs are pretty short, you might have 4 paragraphs, 5 might be stretching it a bit, or you might have 3 paragraphs, so 3.2 paragraphs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my essay template and is that what you can see right now? Just a thumbs up. Otherwise I have to like fix the screen. Yep. Thank you. Great. So now I'm just going to like copy and paste this. First I'll do this. So I'll just bold and underline these. So rather than do it again every time, I'll just hit Format Painter. and then I can do that. I'll hit Format Painter again, and then I can do that. Okay. So I might put a bunch of space in here. Okay, so here I'm gonna go 300 words. Topic sentence, evidence, linking sentence. So here's my template. And what I need to do is I'm gonna have 3.2 paragraphs. Okay, which means I should copy and paste this, and it's 3.2. So maybe I'd leave it at 3. Maybe I'd stretch it to 4 if you know, maybe like 2 of my paragraphs are going to be short, or something like that. So what I do is now I'm just going to like amend the numbering. So this will be body paragraph 2. This will be body paragraph 3. This will be body paragraph 4. And if I've got 4 body paragraphs, notice the last one's probably going to be an objection one. You know, typically you put your objection your objection, you raise it at the end. So you know, it kind of doesn't interrupt the flow of the essay as much to put it in at the end. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this, instead of like body paragraph, it is a body paragraph, but just because it's a little bit different, I'm just going to rename it objection paragraph. Okay, and now for evidence, I'm going to have to do something a little bit different. Like when I structure the template of the basically the objection paragraph. Okay, so after my thesis statement, what I'm going to have is the topic sentence, and I'm going to have like I'm going to put this all to the left so it's easy to see. Evidence for objection, right? And just to make the template a bit neater, I'm just going to like leave just a 1 there, and then I'm going to say evidence for dismissal. Okay, and here I'll have some evidence, all right, and then some argument and linking sentence to the conclusion. Okay, so just a thumbs up that everyone's like happy that they understand what I'm doing. Great. Now, what I'm going to do is I've already done my research, and I'm pretty sure you get what I mean when I say in scenario and out of scenario, but I'll just clarify this here. When I say, so, you know, I'm imagining a scenario where that I'm like a student that's writing an essay, and I'm still confused about what I want to argue and how I'm going to write this essay. And this is kind of just what I'm doing is going to streamline the process for me. And you may have noticed that before we went for the break, when I was explaining the various concepts and issues that were going to relate to the essay I was going to write, I wasn't explaining them so precisely. And, you know, I was explaining them a bit hand wavy. You know, like that's deliberate. I'm kind of like trying to take on the persona of a student that's still trying to come to grips with those issues. Okay, so that's what I mean by in scenario. So sometimes I'll say, okay, now I'm in scenario, and I'll say a bunch of things, and then sometimes I'll say, okay, now I'm speaking outside of the scenario, and I'm like actual Billy, who, you know, has a much better idea of what he's doing with writing this essay, and then I'll go back to like the student that I'm pretending to be. Okay, so that's what I mean by in scenario and out of scenario. Okay, so I deliberately kind of left all those issues vague and sort of explained them kind of okay, but not all that great. Okay, I was being in scenario then. Okay, now as I'm writing as I'm coming up with what I want to argue, when I'm confused about some of the course content, I need to get clear about them. And a way that I get clear about them and help myself understand them and get very precise about what they are and what they're all about, that kind of thing, is the Feynman technique. So you can look that up. But basically, the Feynman technique is that you try and explain it to like a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old. And if you can do that, then you understand it really well. Now, you don't literally go and find a random 5-year-old or 10-year-old on the street and start explaining it to them. You just pretend that you've got one in front of you, and then you try and do it in your head, and you try to do it out loud, and then you try and do it on paper. Okay, so that's how I come to grips with complex stuff. And I might make a video where I apply the Feynman technique to different topics in our course, like like the problem of induction or inductivism or falsificationism or something like that, or Kuhn's philosophy. That might be an interesting video because Kuhn's is probably the most complicated to understand. So yeah, Feynman technique in Kuhn's views might be an interesting, fun video for me. I mean, I hope it's interesting and fun for you. I mean, it will be fun for me to make. A bit of a challenge. Okay, so I have to leave pretty soon, but this draft is going to be done. So what I do is I look here and I think to myself, I'm just going to remove my charger because my laptop is fully charged. Okay, so I moving some chords around. Okay, so I have a rough idea of what, a very rough idea of what I want to argue, but not a very precise idea. So I'm going to open up like the essay question, the essay question, like the task sheet that I made before, and I'll start sharing that. And just going to send a message to someone. I just need to send a message to someone and get back to them. So that'll just take me a minute. Okay, cool. Yeah, a few student emails. I'm just making sure that none of them are trying to get into the Zoom meeting and can't. Great. Okay, what can you see right now? Just me or any pages? Someone can just tell me in the chat. Just me? Okay. All I have to offer you is me. My parents love that song. It's a task sheet that I want to, yeah, feel free to make fun of my singing. There's no talent here. I'm not going to be going on any like Idol or X Factor shows anytime soon or ever for that matter. Where am I at? Task sheet. Okay, so I'm sharing that and come back and I give this thing a read again because this can ground me if all of a sudden my thoughts start going off in random places and I say, oh, okay, like that's right. Yep. So some, like some might hold the view that world leaders would voluntarily just start reducing their carbon emissions because if they don't, catastrophe will ensue. The planet will become uninhabitable for humankind. So that seems like reason enough that they would reduce them voluntarily, and we wouldn't need any kind of mutual coercion or anything like that. You wouldn't need anything like economic sanctions. But that's right. There's something that I read about. I don't remember whether it was Harden or Gooden or Gauss, but they were talking about prisoners' dilemma. I remember those are the three sources I've read so far, though, and they were speaking about these prisoners, this prisoner's dilemma, the tragedy of the commons, and yeah, that actually made it pretty clear. I remember it was pretty clear to me then why they would come to the conclusion that they should not reduce their greenhouse gas emissions if they were trying to purely, if they were only considering their own self-interests. Yeah, that's right. They were trying to get all the benefits of greenhouse gas emissions for free without having to foot the economic bill. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yep. Okay, yes. And so I think it's that prisoner's dilemma does a good job of explaining why they wouldn't voluntarily reduce their emissions, and and as it stands now, I think I'm going to have to disagree that that world leaders will voluntarily reduce, because it's going to carry economic burdens for them. And I happen to know myself uh, that world leaders really, really worry about GDP per capita. It's an economic metric that is heavily correlated with whether or not governments get reelected or not. And if they were to foot this economic bill, if they were to foot this economic bill in the form of reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, then that's going to be bad for the economy, which means GDP is not going to be high. The local populace in their countries will realize that economic downturn is occurring. Things won't be so good for the middle class as they used to be before they were starting to pay for all the economic costs that come with reducing their carbon footprint, their greenhouse gas emissions. And the middle class is the biggest voting bloc in any democracy. So they might not vote for world leaders that are reducing the carbon footprint, because they might not realize that the economic downturn that they are experiencing is because they are trying to protect the environment. They might think that a decrease in GDP and an increase in environmental conservation are related. Maybe they think, oh, government, why can't you keep GDP on the increase and help protect the planet against climate change by reducing our emissions? Why can't you do both? And can't you have soft shell and hard shell tacos? Yeah, so I think I'm going to have to argue against those people that think world leaders would voluntarily reduce their emissions. Okay. All right. So now I'm speaking outside of scenario. That was obviously inside scenario. So I've come back from pacing around in my backyard. I might not have even been at my computer while I was doing this, and I've put down my pipe where I've been doing all my philosophizing in the basement or pacing around in my backyard, and I've clarified some of my thinking a little bit. All right. And I think what I'm going to do is basically come up with a topic sentence for the first paragraph. Okay. So I might stop sharing this screen, but does everyone understand what I've done? I kind of came up with an overall rough feeling about how I felt about the essay question that's highlighted. So thumbs up if you understand what I was doing, speaking in scenario before. Okay, and you see how like my reasoning there was like not all that precise. It's nothing you could ever write in an essay, right? But what I'm trying to do is fix what's going on up here, because if that's not clear, then what gets put down on paper is going to be even worse. Okay? Yep. So I had to clarify that. So now I come back. I've got a rough idea of my overall view, but I'm still not sure exactly what I'm going to argue. It's kind of like I've decided, this question that's highlighted here, it's like, I've kind of got an answer to this, like, oh, because it's going to be costly, and that's going to make it difficult for them to get elected, and plus, they don't want to foot the bill whilst everyone else doesn't, and if everyone else does foot the bill, then they don't see the need to, because it's getting paid for by others, right? Okay, if we all go out for coffee, and one of you shout all of us, including me, well, then I'm not going to pay for my coffee a second time. Okay, so if the air is getting cleaner, I'm not gonna pay for that cleanliness when I'm getting it for free. Okay, and this part here, I've decided at least that I don't agree with it. Some world leaders might be inclined to cooperate and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to protect the environment. And if so, some may argue that economic sanctions are unnecessary. Well, I didn't reason too much about sanctions, but I at least decided that I don't think they're going to voluntarily reduce it, even though it seems so obviously straightforwardly the case that they should, because the environment is in danger. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to go back to my essay template, and what I'm going to do is start trying to come up with a topic sentence. Just one person, a thumbs up to make sure they're seeing the right screen. So I've got the cursor at the topic sentence. Okay. So my first topic sentence is just going to be, I'm going to speak outside of scenario for a second. I'm going to, like, the language I use is going to sound silly. Okay. Remember, I've said it time and time again in the last video, and I think I've said it a few times in this video, that my first draft is going to be garbage. It's going to be laughable. Okay. And we're going to polish it draft after draft after draft until it becomes something decent. And then we're going to polish some more. Okay. Until it becomes good. Okay. So this is the process by which we take an essay task, which is, stress-y, depress-y, lemon zesty, and make it easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Okay. My topic sentence. Right. Well, I know that some world leaders aren't going to voluntarily reduce, or I want to argue that most world leaders aren't going to voluntarily reduce their greenhouse gas emissions because it's costly. So I might say reducing, and I don't care about whether I'm sticking to the right tense and being consistent and all that stuff. I don't care. I don't care about any of that. I'm just writing the way it naturally comes to me in my head. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions is costlier than not reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I don't go into all this stuff about GDP per head and economic downturn and the middle class being the significant voting bloc within liberal democracies. Okay, so I can just keep it really simple. Now, evidence. What I might do is I might go to one of my sources, okay, and because I know that even though I'm not looking at my sources right now, I know that when I was reasoning in my head, in my backyard, trying to come up with what I think, I I realized that I wanted, I wanted to argue what I've written there in the topic sentence. And how did I come to that belief? And how did I arrive at my motivation to argue it? Well, it must be because I had some evidence, because I try my best not to have arbitrary and dogmatic beliefs. I try to have justifications for my beliefs. Okay. If you imagine there's a barrel of apples, okay, and the barrel is like the set of all my beliefs, and all of the apple is full of barrels. Okay. Part of what philosophers are engaged in doing is going into the barrel and inspecting each apple for its quality. Okay. And if it's rotten, well, one rotten apple could infect the rest of the bunch. Okay. It could contaminate the other beliefs in the belief system. So a rotten apple, I'm going to like cut out the rotten bit, or I'm going to throw out the apple completely, maybe somehow try and amend or fix the apple so that it can go back in. Or I'm going to toss it out completely, and just have one less belief in my system, or I'm going to exchange it for a perfectly good apple. But before I let that perfectly good apple come into the barrel, I'm going to inspect it very closely to make sure it is a good apple. All right. I only want good eggs, no rotten eggs. Okay. So yeah, I must have had some evidence for that topic sentence. So what I do is I go back to my sources and I scan through them, right? And I I find that when I'm scanning through my sources, I find a bunch of evidence from source 2 and a bunch of evidence from source 1, and a bunch of evidence. Actually, let's stick with those two sources. Um, and what I'm going to do is, rather than like swap between screens all the time, uh, I've already showed them to you, and you can go back earlier in the video and look at the source 1 notes and the source 2 notes and the source 3 notes. I'm just going to grab them, but like I've gone to each one and I've copied and pasted them into a clipboard. And now I'm just going to come back to my essay template, and I'm going to go bam. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is, I might have like saved this first as a template and then started a new document to do this, so that I can keep referring back to the template to keep me on track. But you see all that in the previous video, so I'm not going to keep doing it here, so that I'm not like opening all these documents and sharing and unsharing screens. But yeah, you decide on what you want. I like to at least keep some early version of the template. Maybe this would be it, or maybe before I started messing with it would be the one I keep, so that I can keep referring back to it to keep me grounded, and so that I don't get off topic, and so that I don't start writing outside the structure of an essay, that kind of thing. But boom, there's like paragraph 1 is planned. Okay. So I never really have to actually like write it, so to speak, as if there's like nothing there and I just write it from scratch to finish. It's really just some bone and I start adding flesh, like itty bitty. I'm just touching it up. It's like a painting. A lot of famous painters didn't actually paint their paintings fully. What they would do is like draw outlines and then like paint the main bit, and then they would pay budding painters to like fill in details and stuff. Okay, but like details seem minor in isolation, but the sum of all the detail uh really makes a lot of the painting in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, those people that weren't the famous artists that came in and would like flesh out details with the paint. This is usually at night when the artist is sleeping and they're getting paid to do it. Um, they're doing a lot of the painting too, and it's that process that accounts for like the writing of a paragraph, the fleshing out stuff. Okay. Whereas what I've done here is I've put in the skeleton. That's like the famous painter during the day. Okay. He draws outlines, he paints and colors the main bits. Okay. Right. So that's the skeleton bit. And what you're going to do later is come back, metaphorically speaking, as one of those assistant painters in the middle of the night, trying to make ends meet during the quarantine. Because you can't paint together at the same time. Uh, not with that attitude. You got to have 1.5 meter distance. It's just easier to do it when the angry painter guy is sleeping. Okay, so Then I look at body paragraph 2 and I think to myself, well, what do I want to argue here? Well, after here, I would have like explained why it's more costly. You see, it gets easier as you do it because once you decide what you think about previous stuff, it's a bit like a process of elimination thing. It can help you determine what you think about remaining stuff. So like if you're arguing about Popper versus Kuhn, well, if you really, really, really disagree with Popper, then that might make you feel like you might be more sympathetic to Kuhn. That disagreeing with Popper doesn't logically imply that you have to agree with Kuhn, but you might think that if Popper's view seems so bad to you, and irrational or something like that, then you might suspect that you're going to have better hope with Kuhn, in terms of agreeing with Kuhn or not. Anyways, so then I might decide that for the second topic sentence, because I've explained the way a prisoner's dilemma works and why things are more costly, maybe this is going to be about getting out of a prisoner's dilemma. All right. And how might we get out of prisoner's dilemmas is this is where I have to go away and think. So now I'm going back to being in scenario, and I say to myself, well, I've argued in the previous, or like I intend to argue in the previous paragraph that we're in a prisoner's dilemma. So this is in scenario, and I'm pacing around in my backyard, like pretending to be somewhat confused and hazy, and I'm like, well, I've just argued that world leaders won't voluntarily, I've just planned to argue that world leaders won't voluntarily reduce emissions because we're in a prisoner's dilemma. So there needs to be some motivation, some kind of mutual coercion between nations that would make world leaders decide to reduce emissions anyways. And maybe that could be in the form of economic sanctions, because maybe we could apply these economic sanctions in such a way that it makes not reducing the costlier option, because these world leaders are motivated by not suffering economic downturn. So what if we could engineer a scenario in which we could make the unwillingness to reduce greenhouse gas emissions the scenario which generates more economic downturn than in the case where you choose to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah. Okay. So basically, yeah, mutual coercion in the form of economic sanctions might be a way to compel world leaders to stick to emissions targets, emissions reductions target. Okay. So now I'm going to I come back, right? And I'm excited because I'm a little bit more clearer on what I want to say. And I say, mutual coercion between mutual coercion between states, I mean like nation states, but I don't care about being precise right now or anything like that. Mutual coercion between states in the form, I don't care about using brackets or whatever, in the form of economic sanctions, can compel world leaders to reduce emissions. I'm just going to say emissions. Okay. Now I'm going to go through my my Word document and I'm going to look around and my source documents, and I'm going to look around for evidence. Okay. And all I'm doing here in this part of the template is exactly what I did in body paragraph 1. It's just that now in body paragraph 2, it's easier. Okay. Because I already knew what I thought about a related topic. That helped me arrive at what I think about the next topic, right? So actually all the hard work is done. Body paragraph 1 was the hardest thing, as well as the first instance where I came up with my overall feeling, my overall really tentative, rough, imprecise view. All the hard work is done. Yep. Okay, so now I go between all of my sources and, because to arrive at that topic sentence, I must have had evidence if I was thinking properly. So I'm going to go through all of my sources, the stuff that I've read, and what I might find is that, um, my evidence came from the first source. Okay, and I just had one piece of evidence, right? So now I'm going to come back and I'm going to copy and paste it in, and you can probably see usually in a paragraph where you have less pieces of evidence, that's going to be a shorter one. It's not always the case, but that's all I needed. All right. So now I'm going to forget about the linking sentence for now, because that's just part of making the sentence structure flow. But I never actually gave examples of linking sentences in the previous video, I don't think. And there's a few things I forgot to mention about the objection paragraph. The cool thing is I'm going to write a whole essay. So you're going to see linking sentences, and you're going to see how I choose my objection, and you're going to see, yeah, anything I forgot to mention in the first video, you're going to see here, because there's going to be a whole essay. All right, now I come back to paragraph 3, and I realize that this is the last one before the objection sentence. And I go, I'm just going to pause, that make sure that everyone's sort of following me and happy that they understand what I've done. Legends. All right, I love you all. Okay, now, in the third paragraph, maybe I'm going to say, I'm going to talk about, what have I talked about before, like coercion being a means of, convincing world leaders to reduce emissions. And I'm going to get to objection paragraph. Where am I up to? Can you see my cursor right now when I do this? Just give me a sec. Because am I still sharing the same screen? Can you see this? So I'm clicking around between body paragraph 2 and 3. It's hard for me to open the chat without stopping the share. Yeah, cool. Thanks, Mary. Okay, so in body paragraph 3, what might I do? I'm still not sure. Some leaders might really be opposed to sanctions. They've all got to agree to do it. And it's like I'm trying to come up with a topic to write about. I seem to have hit a mental roadblock. Well, when that happens, what I'm going to do is, speaking outside of scenario now, I'm just going to like stop sharing that screen, and I'm going to share another screen, and guess what it's going to be? You can have a guess before I get it open and start sharing it, but I'll just give you an opportunity to guess what it's going to be. What am I going to come back to when I hit like a mental roadblock and I think I might be getting off topic and I want to stay on task? What am I going to come back to ground me? There's the essay template. I can come back to the essay template, but the thing is, fleshing out the template is what I'm having trouble doing right now. Okay, so fleshing out the essay template is what I'm having trouble doing. Maybe I'll look at my template when I'm going through drafts, but right now I can't look back at my template because it's still what I'm fleshing out. Yeah, so one person answered essay template, but there's another document that I think I should refer to right now. So now I'm going to go back into scenario, and it's like, man, I feel like I'm getting off topic. I'm not sure what to make this paragraph about. Well, hang on. Am I covering everything in the essay question? Am I leaving important stuff out? I should go and check to make sure. Uh, I'm covering my bases. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the essay task sheet. So task sheet, which I saved in the research folder. I'm going to start sharing that when it opens. So I open it, and then it opens fine. But then when I go to share it in Zoom, I don't see it. So I'm just trying to like fix that. I'm just going to close some of the sources. I usually wouldn't if I was actually working, but I'm just closing some of the source documents so I can have more documents display on my Zoom share options. All right, that seems to have fixed things. All right, so I'm sharing the task sheet right now. If you can see it, that's great. If you see something else, just tell me. But here's the task sheet, and I look at it, and I think, well, I feel confident that I'm going to have this covered with what I've got in my template already. I haven't said much about this other than just like a word: economic sanctions, mutual coercion. All right. And I can't just leave it at, okay, let's apply sanctions. Because I did say that the sanctions have to make it, they have to make the reluctance to reduce one's emissions the costlier option. Because as it stands now, the willingness to reduce is what the costly option is. So the sanctions need to at least go that far where they basically inverse the relationship between what's costly and what's cheap regarding pollution and environmental degradation, that kind of thing. So yeah, I haven't really covered this. So what I'm going to do is, now that I've grounded myself again, I've come back from pacing around in the backyard. I've got like my topic sentence for the next paragraph, and I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to come back to the Word doc, and I'm going to say, when I find the Word doc, all right, can you see my cursor clicking around? Like right now it's next to an A, and right now it's next to a B. Great. All right, so this is paragraph 3, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a topic sentence in there, and I'm going to say, something really like unacceptable to put in an essay, because the goal is not that this appears in an essay as it stands now. The goal is that it captures like my view. So, you know, the view is acceptable to put in an essay, but the language in which I frame it isn't. I'm going to say like, you know, I'm going to go overboard with unacceptability. I'm going to be like, you know, economic sanctions really have to be costly enough on world leaders, and their economies, because if they're not, because then, um, not reducing your greenhouse gas emissions becomes the expensive thing, right? I'm just going to minimize the Zoom thing because I can't see what I'm typing. Okay, comma. All right. Rather than the cheap thing. And then I might put in brackets, you know, we want to invert the balance of cost. Okay. So does everyone understand what I've done there? And you see how terrible that is as a topic sentence to appear in a final essay? Yep. It's not going to appear that way. It's going to get turned into something that has, you know, it's more precise, it's less vague, and it's going to be, you know, it's going to be couched in terms that you would find acceptable in a philosophical essay. But now I might look around and look for evidence for this. And because, you know, if this is what I think, I don't think it dogmatically. And now it's easier because, you know, my eyes have been poring over the source material, and uh, and sorry, I'm like thinking as I speak. You know, like remember how I said it? The further along you get, the easier it gets. Yep. Okay. So this is going to be easier. But what I'm going to do is, because I've got to run, I'm going to call this meeting here. And look, we almost got like a whole draft. All we'd have to do is like fill in a few sentences, finish out that objection paragraph, and we'd get almost a full draft. So I'm going to be, you know, like back in a few hours or something, and I'll continue on with this Zoom meeting. Is everyone happy to call it there? Okay, cool. So I'll be back. I'll let everyone know when I'm coming back to this. It'll be tonight. And yeah, if I didn't sort of have to explain as I went, this would be a lot quicker, and like we'd already have a draft. So I think this will be an easy YouTube video to watch on double speed. Okay, so bye for now, and if you know, if you tune in later tonight, I'll see you then. If not, this will go up on YouTube. All right. Peace.